Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Erina, and I'm here today to try and squeeze my experience into 10 minutes. So I went to a New Hall boarding school in Chelmsford, and it was definitely an experience that changed my life. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you just a quick rundown of what I do now, where I am, and then I'll work backwards just to give you some context as to how I got to where I am. So I currently lead the Mayor's volunteering programme in schools, and we encourage young people to get involved in youth social action and volunteer in their community. But prior to that, I worked in participation and youth engagement with children in care, care leavers, and more recently adopted young people on a national scale. The reason I'm here today actually is because a couple of years ago I decided to do a master's in migration and diaspora studies, and the reason was because I wanted to look at identity construction and more so identity construction with children in care. I was in care from the age of about 5, and I went from placement to placement to placement before I went to boarding school. And when I started doing my research, I thought actually boarding school was a really, really big deal for me. And I didn't think that before, but when I started unpicking my identity, boarding school was a huge part of that. So I was asked to speak about my dissertation called No Place Like Home at Oxford University, and I met Gareth, and Gareth introduced me to Colin, and here I am today. So a bit about my background. I migrated to the UK when I was about 3. I came here from Uganda, and by the time I was 4.5, I was in care, under a full care order, and the reason was because of neglect and abuse and many other things that happened in that family home. So whilst I was looked after, about 5 placements in the first 9 years of being in care, and I moved from a West Indian family who loved me and cared for me, and I was there for 5 years, and then social services decided that they weren't the right cultural match because obviously I'm Ugandan, and they were from Barbados, so they thought this isn't going to work because we need to have a look at the cultural match. So they sent out emails upon emails. They put me in newspapers looking for someone who was Ugandan to come and look after me. Although my placement was going very, very well, they weren't from Uganda, so that was the most important, obviously. So I left the Bayesian family, and they found me a Ugandan family, but that placement broke down after about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then from that, I just got moved around and around and around and around. So, I mean, schooling for me I wasn't a lover of formal education, really, but the movement didn't help. The movement had a detrimental impact on my education. I lived in various places in East London, various places in South London, in North London, and each time I moved schools. So education began to slip lower and lower and lower on the priority list for me, and it was really about just getting through and surviving day by day and waiting for this next family to say that for whatever reason the placement isn't going to work. And then when I was 14, I was on the verge of yet another placement breakdown, and my social worker approached me with a 2-part proposition, and she said, she introduced the idea firstly as a dance school, because I really wanted to do dance. So she's like, oh, I found this great dance school for you in Chelmsford. And I was like, yes, brilliant. And she said, but it's also a boarding school. And I said, right. And I had no real concept of boarding school. It's not something I'd ever really thought about. And so at that point, so many people have been making decisions about my life that to be honest, I was just like, okay, I mean, you're not really asking me, you're telling me this is what's going to happen. So I was like, okay, fine. And the second part of the proposition was to go back to the family from Barbados, the original family I was with, and I will go back to them during the holidays. So it kind of came full circle, but I said, okay, fine, as long as I don't have to go to church, fine, put me down. Little did I know that the school was a Catholic boarding school run by nuns. So, yeah, next slide. So, my first visit to Newhall, it was really, really scary, actually, really intimidating. And I had never seen anything like it in my life. I spent the majority of time either in Leytonstone or Peckham, and scenery like this, for me, was only on TV. So, the first visit was quite memorable. So the school has maybe a mile long drive, and along each side are just trees. I mean, never been so intimidated by trees. There's just so many trees. And as you drive down, the building just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And as the building got bigger and bigger, I shrunk even more into my seat. And I thought, oh my goodness, where are all the shops? There are no shops around here. What if I need to go to the shop and get sweets? And I was really, really intimidated. And this is just something from my dissertation. The grounds of the school were like nothing I had ever seen before. Acres of land and greenery. I did not quite understand it in this way at the time, but this was to be the backdrop of my life for the rest of my childhood, and essentially what I would come to call home. This particular, I refer to this as a placement because to me it was another placement, and I didn't quite realise it at the time, but this place became home for me. This place became security for me. Like, this was where I felt most at peace. Yeah, so the first, not even 100 days, probably the first year was hell. Like, I didn't know where I was. First of all, the so-called dance school, it did have a brilliant performing arts department, but it wasn't the type of dance I thought I was going to do. So I was really interested in like hip-hop dancing and break dancing, really wanted to do that. I got tap, I got ballet, I got contemporary, I got jazz, but no breakdancing or hip hop. But and at first I was just like, what is going on? The people, my peers were really excited to have me there. They were like, oh yeah, this cool black girl from East London. And they were asking me questions upon questions like, do you live near EastEnders? And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I think because of that, they loved me even more and embraced me even more. Whenever they were getting into trouble or anything, they'll put me front and center and be like, yeah, go. But I still felt uncomfortable. I still felt insecure. I still felt like everything that I had been through, my own story, was not, this wasn't a place for that type of story. So I did feel quite isolated within myself because I didn't feel like any of these people had any idea what I had been through. And I didn't feel like it was a safe space to really share that. However, my teachers didn't love me as much as my peers did. I was really, really disruptive. I was really behind because prior to going to that specific school, I wasn't at school for about 9 months. I wasn't going to school, and I threw a chair at the geography teacher. I was not settled at all, and I just couldn't find my place. And I did feel really, really alone. But I did have that security knowing that when on holidays I could go back to my foster carers, and that gave me a sense of security as well. I think in terms of sleeping in a new environment, that wasn't that was okay for me because I've had to do that so many times. But the having people constantly around, I'd never had before, like people constantly in your face. There was also this rigid routine that I wasn't used to. You wake up at a certain time, you go to breakfast at a certain time, lights out at a certain time, lights on at a certain time. It was just a bit much for me. But I grew to love the routine. What changed? Well, there was a girl there who was actually looked after by the same local authority as me. And she was essentially the reason why I got to that place, because her social worker spoke to my social worker and sort of referred me on. And she lasted about 9 months, 10 months, and then she got expelled. And I thought, whoa, okay, this is real, okay. So I had to make a decision within myself to either commit to this school and essentially commit to my life, or I could just continue being disruptive, continue the cycle, and then what was the alternative? I didn't really know. So I think it gave me an opportunity to take responsibility. It gave me an opportunity to take ownership, and I knew that the ball was now in my court. I knew that I needed to do A, B, and C every day to get to a certain position, and that's what I did. I followed the routine, day in, day out, for 4 years, and by the time I left in upper sixth at 18, I loved the routine, and it was something that I looked forward to. So doing my MA, I really looked at movement and how movement is synonymous with children in care. And I think the unshakable need for structure and routine, that's my opinion. I think that children in care need routine, and they need structure, and they need to know where they're going every day. They need to know what's happening. But a lot of the time for me, my life could be sort of changed upside down at any given day, because I felt like it was in the hands of the foster carers and the social workers. Because if for whatever reason a foster carer's life changes or their circumstances change, I could be out of the door within a matter of days. So I think the structure and routine that boarding school gave me was really, really essential for me. And then I used this secure base model because I think that for me, boarding school ticked all of these 5 boxes in terms of promoting trust and availability, promoting reflective function, promoting self-esteem, promoting autonomy. And I think in terms of the promoting family membership, although it's not family in the conventional sense, I felt a member of that school. I felt as part of that network. I felt like I belonged. And that definitely gave me a secure base for the future. Another thing it did for me, it raised my aspirations. I had higher expectations for myself because of my peers and the people that I was around day in, day out. The teachers encouraged me. They, grades were really super important. And at the time, I didn't get it. But now, because of that push and because of that encouragement, it got me to where I am today. Also, it taught me about not giving up. I mean, I done my maths GCSE like 3 times because the school was like, you are passing this GCSE. It's like, this is not going in our books. Like, you've got to pass. Keep going. Also, give things a go. Like, even if you're not the best, just give it a go. And that's the culture and attitude that I got from being at boarding school. Identity. As I said before, it formed a lot of my identity. I think in terms of being in care, before that, a lot of my identity was about being in care. Like, that's all I knew. Whereas at school, and funnily enough, I was more in touch with my African heritage at this boarding school than I was ever before in any of the other fostering households. And I learned so much about myself when it comes to identity. And is boarding school the solution? Well, that's the $1 million question. I think that I don't think it's the solution. I think that we can't, as people have said already, we can't paint everyone with the same brush. Like, it's not the solution for everyone, not at all. But I think that when you go back to the needs assessment of a child and you understand what that specific child needs at that specific time, it might be, it might not, but for me, it really was, and it really changed my life. Just one more quote. Multiple placement moves and consequently the instability of care should never be taken for granted and should always be considered whenever children in care are required to recreate home, because essentially every time a child moves, they have to recreate home and what home means to them. So, yeah. And this is a mile-long drive.